Hi, this is Mary from the Daily Sew. When you think of a bandana, you probably think of a print like this. But bandanas come in all sorts of designs, and I'm going to show you today how to make a bandana from your choice of fabric. This is an easy project. It's a great use for larger scraps, and it's going to show you 2 different ways to finish a raw edge, which is useful in numerous other sewing projects. So if you're ready, let's go. So along with the usual tools, scissors, ruler, thread, iron, and sewing machine, or you can do this by hand, you're going to need fabric. And let's talk about this for a second. The fabric needs to be soft and not too stiff, something you can tie. Go ahead and play with the fabric and decide if it behaves like a bandana would. Is it soft enough to be against your neck? Cotton is a good choice. It's soft and durable. But also check the backside of the fabric. Because both sides of the fabric are on display when worn, typically bandanas are the same on both sides. A solid fabric woven from dyed yarns, like this pink fabric, is the same on both sides. However, this pink fabric is tightly woven and a little too stiff. A woven pattern made with dyed yarns is going to be the same on both sides. Many lightweight printed fabrics are so thin that the dye seeps through to the wrong side of the fabric and leaves an almost identical back to the front. And of course, fashion rules are meant to be broken, so you can choose a one-sided fabric for a bandana as well. So let's talk size. Bandanas are square and typically range from 24 to 26 inches in size. Recently, bandanas are smaller because smaller equals less fabric, which equals lower cost. So feel free to make it as small as 20 inches square. Be sure when it's folded on the diagonal that it's long enough to fit around your neck and has some extra length to tie. Or you can make it as large as 26 to 28 inches square. This is going to be big enough to wrap and tie around the head in a variety of ways. So think of the in use when deciding what size to make. And of course, you can make other shapes and sizes from similar or heavier fabric, but then it's called a scarf and not a bandana. 3/4 of a yard of fabric is going to give you 27 inches, which allows for a little shrinkage and a nice size bandana. Remember to wash your fabric before cutting it. How big you cut the square is an easy formula. You need to cut a square 1/2 inch to 1 inch larger in both directions, width and length, than the size you want the bandana to be when you are done sewing it. The first technique I'm going to show you requires that you cut the square to be only 1/2 inch bigger than the finished size, and the second technique requires the square to be 1 inch bigger. But good news, there's only 2 steps to make a bandana. 1, cut the fabric. 2, finish the edges so they don't fray. And we're already done with the first step. So I'm going to show 2 ways to finish the edges on the sewing machine. If you want to hem by hand or challenge yourself to learn the machine rolled hem, you're going to watch this video, how to sew a narrow rolled hem. A narrow hem is what you see on most bandanas. The edge is simply folded in on itself twice and then sewn down for 1/8 of an inch wide or so hem. Keeping the finished hem narrow reduces the bulk when tying the bandana and lets your bandana look like a bandana. Because if you have a 1/2 inch wide hem, it's going to look more like a napkin, and you can do better than that. So for this technique, when you cut your fabric, cut it 1/2 inch larger in both directions. This will give you 1/4 inch on each side to fold it into 1/8 of an inch wide hem. And you can make the hem a little bigger, but I wouldn't go much larger than 1/4 of an inch. Now you have to measure, fold, and press the edges, but doing all of that simultaneously is a good way to burn your fingers, and that's not good, so I have a tip for that. The tip: use your sewing machine to measure and mark the fold line. Set your machine to a basting stitch, which is a long stitch length, and sew in from the edge along all 4 sides the width of your hem allowance. In my case, it's 1/4 of an inch. Then, wrong side up, fold on that stitch line so the stitches are just coming over to the wrong side, and press. Do this on all 4 sides. If your fabric is lightweight, starching the edges before folding and pressing will help a lot. Then next, open the fold and place that raw edge or the cut edge to meet the crease that you just made. press, and again, all the way around all four sides. And then when you get to the corners, they're just going to fold over one another. So at the machine, place the hem under the needle so it is on the top and you can see that hem. And insert the needle through all the layers. Grab hold of the thread tails, both the needle and the bobbin thread, and lower the presser foot. Hold the thread tails back and a little taut with your left hand. This is going to prevent the needle from pushing the fabric down into the machine when you start sewing. You want to sew the hem down close to the inner fold and take those first few stitches slow. So here's what it looks like and on the right side. When you get to the corner, slow down. Use a pin or finger or something sharp and small to hold the next hem in place, the next side's hem in place. Get the needle down through the fabric, lift the presser foot, and turn the bandana. You want to add a scrap of fabric behind the needle under the foot. You're not going to sew on it, just have it there and continue sewing. If you do this at every corner, it's going to prevent the needle from pushing the fabric down into the hole there into the machine because lightweight fabrics are really prone to do this. When you're done, it'll look like this. Now, I chose to sew my hem with a contrasting thread for fun and so that you can see the stitches. Using matching thread, of course, will blend in a lot better. Okay, so let's learn the second way. So this bandana has a serged edge using matching thread. I like this idea, but on thin fabric like this, it's really hard to sew directly on the edge without the fabric being pushed down into the machine. So we're going to sew a line of stitches a ½ inch in all the way around, and then stitch a narrow zigzag on that line of stitches, and then trim off the extra fabric. So after basting, set your machine to a narrow, short zigzag stitch. This is also called a satin stitch. My default zigzag stitch is set at 3.5 millimeters wide and 1.5 millimeters long or length. This is the distance between where the needle punctures the fabric as you're sewing along. I'm going to adjust the settings and sew some samples. And even more importantly, I'm going to write down what settings I use next to the sample stitch so that when I decide on which stitch I like the best, I can replicate it. Remember, instead of sewing over the edge, we're going to sew over the basting stitches and then trim off the excess fabric. I'm getting a nice stitch here, as you can see. And as you sew the stitch, you may need to spread the fabric with your right fingers to prevent the needle from grabbing extra fabric. You can turn at the corners, adding a scrap of fabric behind the needle like before, or you can stop at the end of each side and start over, pulling the thread tails at the start. When all the sides are sewn, add a drop of fray check to the stitches on the corners. Then you'll need sharp pointed scissors. Now these are duckbill scissors, and not everybody has or even needs these, but if you have them, they're perfect for this job. But any scissors with a sharp tip are going to work great. Very carefully trim off the excess fabric to the outside of the stitches. Do not cut your stitches. After cutting, go back and trim off any thread whiskers. They will pop up if you run your hand on them. And here is this bandana edge done. It still has some whiskers that I'll trim off, but I like the look of this on the printed fabric. This stitch has no wrong or right side. It's the same on both sides, which draws less attention to the fact that my fabric has a wrong side. A bandana really is a blank canvas. The simple shape does not interfere with any design happening on the cloth, so this is an opportunity, or a calling even, to have some fun. You can try block printing, painting, dyeing, or add decorative stitches to your bandana. Dharma Trading Company is a great resource for fabric paint and fabric dye, and even has pre-hemmed blank bandanas. I'm going to include their info in the description. Any design could be added all over, or you could add a design just in one corner. You could add embroidery stitches to a printed fabric as well, or use a fancy machine stitch instead of a straight stitch to sew around the edges. It's very hard to find that traditional block print on a roll of fabric in the stores because that fabric is made specifically for the bandana manufacturer. But if you find some for sale, you should leave us a link in the comments below, please. For some pretty cool bandanas, check out the companies Hanker, Mr. Bandana, All Very Goods, and Last Chance Textiles. I've put links to them in the description, plus there's a good article on the history of the bandana. Well, I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions about making the bandana, please put in the comments below and I'll be sure to reply. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.